The cameras have already moved on. Maduro has landed in New York. The airspace is quiet again. Briefings are over. But the real story didn't end with the helicopters. It started there. What unfolded in Venezuela is being framed as a legal case, a security operation, a tactical success. That framing is convenient. It keeps the focus narrow. It keeps attention on faces, uniforms, and sound bites. But this was never a courtroom drama. It was a systems event. This analysis steps away from the spectacle and looks at the underlying machinery, not personalities, not moral posturing, structure, the financial architecture, the energy logistics, the trade routes, and the currency mechanisms that quietly determine power long before soldiers are deployed. For years, pressure accumulated without headlines. Sanctions tightened, banking access closed, insurance vanished, shipping lanes rerouted, energy markets recalibrated. At the same time, China's economic gravity expanded across South America. Ports changed hands, infrastructure deals multiplied, payment systems diversified. Venezuela didn't suddenly become important. It became unavoidable. What looks like a sudden rupture is actually the last move in a sequence that began decades ago, when negotiations stopped working and market realities replaced diplomatic language. This report examines why the confrontation happened now, and not 5 years ago, why oil pricing, currency settlement, and China's position in the hemisphere sit at the center of the decision, even as official explanations keep shifting. Turn on any major network, and you'll see the same images looped endlessly. Troops fast-roping from helicopters, a president under guard. Analysts applauding precision and resolve. That's not accidental. If you're watching the raid, you're not watching the ledger. This was not a democracy operation. This was not about narcotics or human rights. This was debt enforcement, executed with military hardware. There's an unspoken rule in geopolitics that everyone knows and publicly denies. You cannot indefinitely sanction nations that sit atop resources you fundamentally depend on. Not without consequences. For over 2 decades, Washington tried anyway. Venezuela was sanctioned, its assets frozen, alternate governments recognized, opposition movements financed, everything short of direct intervention, until that strategy collapsed. On December 28, Nicolás Maduro signed energy agreements with China, totaling $18 billion. Within 48 hours, the U.S. National Security Advisor quietly sought a meeting with Venezuelan officials in Panama. Not to threaten, not to dictate terms, to negotiate oil access. Oil Washington had spent years trying to erase from the global market. That wasn't diplomacy. That was a retreat interrupted by gunships. For years, the public was told a reassuring story. America, they said, had achieved energy independence. The shale revolution had changed everything. The U.S. was now the world's top producer and no longer needed to care about distant oil fields. That story is half true, and in geopolitics, half-truths are dangerous. The United States produces enormous volumes of oil, but mostly light, sweet crude, high quality, expensive, ideal for export. The problem is structural. America's refinery network, especially along the Gulf Coast, was built decades ago to process heavy sulfur-rich crude, the thick tar-like oil from Venezuela and the Middle East. America produces champagne. Its infrastructure runs on diesel. For years, that mismatch was solved by imports from Saudi Arabia. That era is over. Riyadh is no longer a compliant supplier. Production cuts are deliberate. Prices are managed upward. Saudi Arabia is aligning with BRICS, settling sales in multiple currencies, and ignoring calls from Washington. The message is clear. The vassal relationship is finished. That left the United States with a math problem. Canada is maxed out. Russia is sanctioned. Saudi Arabia is uncooperative. Only one major source of heavy crude remained: Venezuela's Orinoco Belt. This was never about current output. Venezuelan production has collapsed from over 3 million barrels per day to under 1 million. Infrastructure decayed. Investment dried up. Skilled labor fled. So why does Venezuela matter? Because this is about future control. Venezuela holds the largest proven oil reserves on Earth, around 300 billion barrels. Control over that resource isn't about today's supply. It's about who dictates tomorrow's pricing system. For 50 years, global oil has been priced in US dollars. This arrangement, The petrodollar system forces every oil-importing nation to hold dollars. That artificial demand props up U.S. borrowing, suppresses interest rates, and allows deficits that would crush any other country. But the system is cracking. Saudi Arabia declined to renew its exclusive dollar agreement. BRICS nations are settling energy trades in local currencies. China is expanding yuan-based settlement infrastructure. Venezuela was preparing to integrate fully into China's cross-border payment systems and price oil in a multi-currency basket led by the yuan. If that precedent held, China could buy oil without dollars. If China doesn't need dollars, global dollar demand falls. If demand falls, debt servicing costs explode. That not regime optics was the red line. The dollar hasn't been backed by gold since 1971. It's not backed by manufacturing dominance. It's backed by energy settlement. Oil equals dollars. Break that link, and the entire system recalibrates. The so-called exorbitant privilege allowed the U.S. to export inflation, finance deficits, and maintain global leverage for half a century. But in 2024, the cracks became visible. The Saudi agreement expired. The UAE processed $128 billion in yuan-denominated trade with China. Russia sells oil to India in rupees. Iran trades in yuan. The dollar's share of global reserves has fallen steadily, each percentage point representing hundreds of billions in lost treasury demand. Venezuela was not isolated. It was a node. China, Latin America trade exceeded $500 billion in 2024. 20 years ago, it was negligible. Today, China is the largest trading partner for much of South America. Ports, railways, energy grids, and logistics corridors are being built to bypass U.S. systems entirely. The port of Chancay in Peru now connects multiple countries directly to Asia. No U.S. intermediaries, no dollar bottlenecks. Venezuela produces under 1 million barrels today. Under Chinese technical oversight and Russian financing, it could double that within 18 months. But those barrels are already pledged. China and Russia extended tens of billions in oil-backed credit long before helicopters appeared. Washington tried 4 strategies to reverse this trajectory. All failed. Sanctions failed, because oil flows adapt. Proxy leadership failed, because legitimacy can't be imported. Isolation failed, because most of the world refused to comply. Limited licenses failed, because control without sovereignty is illusion. What happened next wasn't ideology, it was arithmetic. And arithmetic doesn't care about press conferences. That strategy unraveled the moment Maduro absorbed the core lesson. Never rely on American concessions that are designed to function as control switches. And then came the final catalyst. According to intelligence briefings that major outlets have largely ignored, Caracas was preparing what financial analysts privately described as a nuclear move. Venezuela was on the verge of formally integrating its entire energy sector into China's cross-border interbank settlement system. At the same time, officials were preparing to reprice the country's full reserve base, the largest proven oil reserves on the planet, not in dollars, but in a multi-currency basket anchored by the yuan and partially backed by gold. Had that transition gone public, it would have sent a shockwave through the global south. It would have demonstrated something Washington has spent decades trying to prevent: that a resource-rich nation can exit the American financial system, reject dollar settlement, and remain economically viable. That precedent, more than any individual leader, was viewed as an existential threat. Faced with that reality, Washington had 2 options: accept a multipolar world and renegotiate its position as one power among many, or deploy the only instrument it still commands in overwhelming supply, military force. It chose force. From a narrow operational perspective, the mission was extraordinary. Elite U.S. Special Operations units extracted Maduro from his residence without sustaining American casualties. Within hours, he was transferred onto a U.S. naval vessel en route to New York, where a sealed indictment filed years earlier waited to be unsealed. At the press conference that followed, Trump was visibly exhilarated. "You probably won't ever see what I saw last night," he said. "It was incredible." He described the operation as if it were a live broadcast, watched in real time from Mar-a-Lago, framed less as statecraft and more as spectacle. But that's where the theater ends, and the consequences begin. Reporters pressed Trump and Marco Rubio with basic questions. Who governs Venezuela now? How long will U.S. forces remain? What is the transition plan? There were no answers. Trump did, however, make one thing clear: American oil companies, he said, would enter Venezuela to fix its energy sector. He openly criticized the country's production levels and stated that oil exports would flow abroad and to the United States as compensation. The following day, Rubio attempted to soften the message. The U.S., he said, doesn't need Venezuelan oil. This operation was about governance, not resources. The contradiction is revealing. Trump stated the objective. Rubio managed the optics. Venezuela is not Panama. This is not 1989. Panama had 3 million people. Venezuela has 10 times that. Panama hosted massive U.S. military infrastructure tied to the canal. Venezuela hosts none. And more importantly, Maduro was not a singular strongman propping up a hollow state. He was a product of a system. The Chavista structure is an interlocking network of military commanders, intelligence services, judicial officials, and armed civilian groups that control everything from ports and mines to food distribution. Removing one node does not dismantle the network. The defense minister remains. The interior minister remains. The vice president remains. Each controls economic territory. Venezuela's military structure is uniquely distorted, featuring roughly 20 times the number of generals expected for a force of its size. Each general oversees revenue streams, mining concessions, shipping terminals, fuel distribution, border trade. The military does not defend the economy. The military is the economy. This is where tactical brilliance mutates into strategic disaster, because the rest of the world is watching. From Nigeria to Brazil to Indonesia, policymakers are drawing the same conclusion. If refusing dollar settlement invites military intervention, then the rational response is not compliance, it is escape. Fear does not generate loyalty, it accelerates exit. At the BRICS summit in Kazan, in October 2024, Vladimir Putin announced the rollout of BRICS Pay, a blockchain-based cross-border payment network designed to bypass dollar clearing entirely. Brazil has already piloted it for agricultural exports. South Africa processed its first diamond transaction through the system weeks later. Russia and Iran are using it for arms settlements. Venezuela has applied for full BRICS membership. If approved, and there is little doubt it will be, over 300 billion barrels of oil reserves will be folded into an economic architecture, explicitly insulated from Washington. This transition is not hypothetical. It is already underway. China increased its official gold reserves by more than 200 tons in 2023 alone. Unreported acquisitions through Hong Kong suggest the real figure is significantly higher. After being removed from SWIFT in 2022, Russia built its own messaging system, now handling a third of domestic payments and expanding internationally. China launched its settlement network a decade ago. As of early 2025, it links over 1,400 institutions across more than 100 countries, processing hundreds of billions of dollars daily without touching dollar-based rails. BRICS expansion has brought in Saudi Arabia, Iran, the UAE, Egypt, and Ethiopia, collectively representing nearly half the world's population and control over the majority of global oil reserves. By intervening in Venezuela to assert control over energy resources, the United States has unintentionally validated every argument its rivals have made about American coercion. Before this operation, countries used the dollar because it was efficient and stable. After it, holding dollar assets increasingly looks like a liability. Sovereignty now appears conditional. Trump believes this demonstrates strength, that America can still act unilaterally, still project force anywhere on Earth. But true power does not require invasion to secure trade. It attracts partners through reliability, technology, and trust. When access to oil requires troops, when influence requires intimidation, when rules are abandoned in favor of coercion, that is not dominance. That is decline under pressure, and the world recognizes it. China recognizes it. Russia recognizes it. India recognizes it. Brazil recognizes it. Even America's allies see it, even if they won't say so publicly yet. The operation was intended to reinforce dollar supremacy and secure energy access. Instead, it accelerated de-dollarization and exposed the fragility beneath American leverage. Tactical victories do not guarantee strategic success. Three paths now exist, none simple. A managed transition, requiring cooperation across fractured institutions. A fragmentation scenario, where power fractures and instability deepens. Or a prolonged great power contest, with Venezuela as an economic battleground. None resolve quickly. and the administration has yet to articulate which path it intends to pursue. Markets are betting on the best-case outcome. History advises restraint. Removing governments is easy. Building states is not. The helicopters have left Caracas. The headlines will move on. Another crisis will replace this one. But the structural damage remains. Trust eroded over decades does not regenerate through statements or summits. Countries will remember this moment. They will plan accordingly. The petrodollar system is not ending because of crypto or inflation. It is ending because it has been revealed as coercive rather than cooperative, and coercion is costly. The world is reorganizing. New systems are emerging. New alliances are solidifying. The tragedy is not that change is happening. Change was inevitable. The tragedy is that it will now be harsher, faster, and less stable than it needed to be. The helicopters were the opening image. What follows will be far more complex than those in power appear prepared to manage.